Welcome to Soccer Morning on NASN. Here's your host, Jason Davis.
Good morning, everybody. Happy Wednesday. Jason Davis here with you on another edition of Soccer Morning on the North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV. We have an excellent show planned for you today. If you are in the Mid-Atlantic to Northeast, you're getting ready for another massive snowstorm. I know producer Trevor's got to be excited about another snowstorm. I know he's got to be thrilled that more snow is coming. And I think they're predicting something like a foot where I live, which is insane amounts of snow. Insane, debilitating, shut down the world amounts of snow in the DC metro area. So we'll see what happens with that. Well, so while you're prepping for that, or if you're not in this part of the country, good for you. You're a lucky person. Getting ready for another big soccer morning today. We've got Luke Moore, our friend from the Football Ramble, will join us in a couple of minutes. We'll talk Premier League. Certainly got to talk about Chelsea dropping points to West Brom yesterday in the title race. And then the big one today is Arsenal-Manchester United. And I think the very, very simple question there is who needs that win more? Arsenal has trouble beating United. David Moyes and United probably need to win more from a psychological standpoint than Arsenal does. Arsenal coming off that drubbing at the hands of Liverpool, but obviously in a much better place in the table, only 2 points back at Chelsea. It's going to be tight all the way down to the wire in the Premier League. Manchester City's got Sunderland today. They're 3 points back at Chelsea, so they have a chance to catch Chelsea, get back up to the top of the table, tie for first. And then obviously, again, if Arsenal can get a win today, they would be back atop the table all by themselves, all by their lonesome. Also today, Kyle McCarthy from Fox Soccer will join us. We're going to talk about an item he wrote over at Fox Soccer addressing the issue of MLS in the Copa Libertadores. This has long been something discussed in the American soccer sphere. The idea of MLS someday joining, just as Liga MX is involved. The biggest, richest, most prestigious competition in this part of the world, in the Americas. Clearly, the Copa Libertadores is top of that list. So we'll talk to Kyle about why that may or may not work for MLS. Because I don't even know that there's ever an invite coming. Let's just keep that out there. But if there was to be an invite, would it even make sense for MLS? Because what we deal with here, as the league in this country tries to make itself more relevant in a worldwide picture, is that there's only so much MLS can do to prove itself. I think that maybe the Libertadores is a little bit of cart before the horse if you're considering that that MLS can't win its own continental title in the CONCACAF Champions League. But that's again part of that problem, and again we'll get into this with Kyle. I don't want to steal all the thunder from that conversation, but part of that problem is just scheduling. MLS has long suffered from a problem with scheduling when it comes to that continental competition. All right. Let me go ahead and open up the phone lines right now, 347-756-6276. Get in with anything ahead of Luke Moore in a couple of minutes. If it's Premier League, if it's MLS, preseason well underway for MLS. Teams are starting to come together, coalesce. I think fan bases are starting to get a sense of what their team might be this year. Obviously, no predictions, very impossible to know exactly in a league built on parity who's going to end up being the best team. Are we going to have any surprises in 2014? I think that's where every year in MLS, that's where the intrigue lies. Who's going to be the surprise team in the that makes the playoffs or makes a deep playoff run? We know that Sporting Kansas City is going to be good. They've been good. We know RSL is going to be good. They've been good. Those are the two finalists from last year. We would expect the Galaxy to be good again. We would expect Seattle to be in the playoff mix. I know there's some doubts coming out of last season, but they've strengthened that side as well. On the East Coast, or in the Eastern Conference, again, I mentioned Sporting already. New York, how good is New York going to be? How much of a referendum on Mike Petke is year two going to be after he wins a supporter shield? I don't think he's going anywhere. And they certainly have the talent to compete, but everybody else seems to have gotten better in the Eastern Conference. So where is New York going to fall in that pecking order? All that stuff coming up. I can't wait for MLS season. It's coming in less than a month? Less than a month until the MLS season gets underway. So the big news TV wise was that NBC Sports has moved some things and is going to feature U.S. International versus U.S. International, Clint Dempsey and Michael Bradley facing off. I think that's like the second week of the season or something like that. Now here's something that's hanging over the head of MLS as the season approaches. Looks like there is, and I wasn't aware of this. Stephen Goff of the Washington Post has a story on this. Apparently, the league and the referees union are currently in collective bargaining negotiations. This is from Peter Walton, general manager of Pro, the professional referee organization. I am not as optimistic as I would like to be. We've come to a number of tentative agreements in many areas. We are some distance apart on our economics, but I don't think the slowness will impact the season. They've got some time. I mean, let's not get panicky yet. And I know that there's probably at least a few of you out there who pay attention to MLS who are probably saying, if we don't have those referees, I could do without them. But keep in mind that any replacement referees are likely to be several degrees worse than what we already have in MLS. I give most referees the benefit of the doubt because it's a very, very difficult job. The game is moving faster than ever before. There are split second decisions that have to be made, which are then analyzed ad nauseum via super slow motion replay. No referee on the field has the benefit of super slow-mo. Was that a dive or was it a penalty? Well, let's go to the super slow-mo. Clearly that's a dive as we slow it down to incredibly slow speeds and are able to pick out the most minute detail. No referee has the benefit of that in game. So I give them the benefit of the doubt on many occasions. There's different things that you can take issue with when it comes to MLS referees. A lot of that is consistency, setting the tone for the proper tone for the game, losing control of the game. Those are things that we certainly need to see improved in MLS refereeing, and hopefully Pro can do that. Steve Taylor, just a couple more quotes on this. Steve Taylor, lead negotiator for the Professional Soccer Referees Association. We are still hopeful to reach an agreement before the regular season begins. We've made progress on non-economic issues, and we've done good work together, but we're now done. So basically, it's down to pay. How much are these guys going to get paid? How much are they worth? How much should they be paid? Now, I think that I'm pretty sure that MLS referees are not full-time guys. I mean, this is not their only job. In fact, I don't know that there are Major League Baseball umpires are full-time. I don't know if NFL referees, and they've had their own work stoppage or collective bargaining issues in recent years. I don't know if they're full-time. MLS could do with some full-time referees, and I think they're trying to push to that. I think they're trying to get there. We would improve the refereeing across the board. All right. Speaking of refereeing, England has their own issues with refereeing. That's a brilliant segue on my part. Luke Moore from the world-famous Football Ramble will join us in just a minute. We'll talk about the Premier League, the standings, where it all stands. Who needs to win more, Manchester United or Arsenal? Don't go anywhere. Soccer Morning.
Welcome back to Soccer Morning on NASN with Jason Davis.
On the line with us now from the world-famous Football Ramble, Mr. Luke Moore, talk Premier League as we do week to week. Luke, how are you?
Good. How you doing? All right?
Yes, absolutely. I'm doing a little bit better than I imagine Chelsea is today. Jose Mourinho is today. Look, I mean, there are going to be these moments. Chelsea has proven themselves as a title contender. They're not going to drop off that summit at this point. But when you drop points to West Brom, there's going to be some questions. I mean, look, it happened. I don't know if there's any other way to analyze that.
Yeah, I mean, West Brom, in fairness to them, have shown under Pepe Mel, they're quite tactically versatile and also quite resilient. They've gone behind to Everton, Liverpool and Chelsea now, I think, and managed to get points out of the game. So, I mean, from that point of view, it's good for them. They battled hard, and from what I saw of the game, I didn't see the entire game, but from what I saw, they were good value. And in fact, even Jose Mourinho after the game said, look, they deserved the point. They put pressure on us. We didn't deal with it very well, and they deserved their point. So, a good result for them, and I think they should get credit for that.
Yeah.
On the Chelsea point, look, I mean, it's a high pressure situation. They're coming into the sort of business end of the season. Manchester City dropped points at the weekend, just gone. Arsenal took a battering, and now Chelsea have dropped points. It can happen. I mean, these teams are fighting for their lives as well in some cases, and they want points too, and they've got some good players here and there. And if your concentration and your focus and application, all that sort of stuff isn't spot on, you're going to get punished. And sometimes we lose sight of the fact that actually the other teams have got good players as well sometimes, and they can perform too.
Yeah, it certainly wasn't one of those situations where it wasn't a smash and grab on West Brom's part. It didn't feel like that. It certainly felt as if they deserved that point in the end. But at the same time, now you look at the table, Chelsea gets 1 point out of that match. Arsenal breathing down their neck, Man City breathing down their neck. And let me take it to Arsenal today. They have Manchester United. This is a chance for them to get back on top. They obviously come off of the drubbing at the hands of Liverpool on the weekend. Let me say it this way: who needs this win more? Manchester United and all of their struggles, and David Moyes potentially his job on the line, or Arsenal after the psychological damage done by Liverpool?
It's quite an abstract question. I think every team needs the win equally as much as the other. Okay. I mean, obviously towards the end of the season you get these sort of dead rubbers here and there, but generally, I mean, both teams are desperate for a win. That's what makes it such an exciting proposition. I mean, the great thing about the top end of the table is that we've seen the leadership of the Premier League change hands so often, and the psychological advantage of being top or falling off top as a disadvantage is huge, and Arsenal know that for all this talk of Manchester City and Chelsea, which I've mentioned to you in the past, all this talk of Man City this and Chelsea that and Mourinho and all this other stuff, Arsenal can still go top tonight. Mm-hmm. So there's a huge incentive there. I think that Arsenal would be pretty, I mean, not guaranteed, but pretty heavy favourites to win this game tonight if they didn't get such a beating against Liverpool. There's still a feeling, certainly over this side of the water, that Arsenal potentially are quite a mentally fragile team, and although they've done a lot to dispel that over the course of the season, it's be really interesting to see how they react after that Liverpool game. On the other hand, Manchester United looked absolutely appalling against Fulham. I know they went ahead eventually, but they got pegged back again. They looked pretty one-dimensional, pretty just average, and so it's not really a great place to go if you're in an average form. But the other dimension to this is the fact that Arsenal seem to have a bit of a blind spot when it comes to playing big teams. Now they sort of lost their nerve at Old Trafford earlier in the season, but I think that was possibly because Man United still had a veneer of sort of fear about them, which I don't think is there anymore. Mm-hmm. But it'll be hugely, hugely interesting to see how Arsenal approach this game tonight, and whether mentally they can put United to the sword, because they've got the ability to do that. And then you've got these, just as a final point, you've got these players who, Manchester United, who can traditionally hurt Arsenal. I mean, Van Persie is well known for hurting Arsenal. Rooney and Mata have got the ability to do it again as well. So it will be such an interesting game. If
what I've pulled up here from the Independent is correct, it looks like Arsenal hasn't beaten United since 2011. Which
they don't have a great record against them, and it was really interesting the way they approached the game at Old Trafford earlier in the season. United, as we know, are in this transitional phase. Arsenal started the season really well. and they just completely reverted to type. They just didn't almost have the mental belief or the confidence to overcome a United side, whatever guys they took, whatever form this United side took. To Arsenal, it just seemed to matter that they were simply Manchester United, and they really need to get over that, and quickly. And they need to get over that tonight. And if they do, I think we'll see an awful lot of pressure again on David Moyes.
Yeah, and speaking of pressure on David Moyes, I maintain that this was from the beginning almost an untenable situation for him, based on sort of the aging of that side and his following in the footsteps of a legend. But he has certainly compounded his own problems, and what came out of the game against Fulham was the insane amount of crosses that Manchester United put in. Something like no team on the continent has even come close to that number in the past 4 years. Is that a fundamental problem with the way Manchester United is approaching the game and the way that Moyes is setting them out? Or is that simply just reverting to, this is what we're given, this is what we can take, and a sign of a team that's lacking confidence?
Possibly a bit of both, but I think, it's not, you started off by saying, David Moyes' position sort of impossible. It is to a certain extent, but it's not necessarily just the results that Manchester United are having. It's the way they're going about it, and the performance against Fulham was just. If you're a Man United fan, it was hugely depressing, I would have thought. But I'm not a Man United fan, so sort of seeing the game as an outsider, it was just bizarre. It was just strange the way they were doing it. I mean, Fulham knew that United were going to try and sort of cross them to death. You could tell that by the way Fulham set up before the game. So the Man United didn't react to that. They just carried on doing the same thing, banging their head against a brick wall over and over and over again, which Fulham felt easily. They felt they could deal with it pretty easily. I mean, they got Dan Burn, who's a big, tall centre-half, who eat up those balls all day long. I mean, when you're an inexperienced but tall and rangy centre-half like he is, that's exactly what you want.
Yes.
You know how to header the ball. It's easy. You haven't got to worry about anything, because all you got to do is just header the ball away. Johnny Hoiting is a seasoned Premier League operator. I mean, he's not the greatest defender around, not the greatest player around, but he's played in the World Cup final. He's experienced. He's been around the Premier League a long time. He can deal with that. And the third point on it is, it's just a ridiculously crazy use of Juan Mata. Juan Mata is so cute as a player, and give him the ball and get those balls sort of in behind the defence and let him unlock things for you. And he could have won them that game easily if he was playing with confidence. It's just such a weird way to approach a game at home to the bottom of the league, who cannot stop shipping goals anyway. So it's in a certain way, it's the approach that United are taking under Moyes, and not just the results. Because if Moyes went through this season blooding new players through, recycling players in and out of the team as they approached this period of transition, and they ended up finishing about fifth, then there's something to hang your hat on there. But I don't want to jump on his back, and Man United fans, to their credit, have been very patient so far, and more power to their elbow. But that starts to give you the sort of feeling that he doesn't really have the ability to manage really, really big players. And I hope that's not true. I'd like to see him do well, and I'd like to see United do well, but it's getting a little bit ominous now, I think.
I found it interesting. I put no stock in this. It was I saw the theory from a blog of no particular repute, but the idea that Moyes could be sacked and that Ferguson could step back in to take over for the rest of the season. I mean, certainly from a casual observer standpoint, or a neutral observer standpoint, that would be amazing. I don't think there's any chance of that happening.
That would almost be Shakespearean. I'd love to see that as an outsider, but I can't really. It would be brilliantly entertaining. I mean, but I can't really see it. No. But David Moyes has got a 6-year contract at Manchester United.
Yeah.
It's a long-term project. I think I said at the time, I'm not sure it was on your show, but I've certainly said it maybe on mine, is that, they've hired David Moyes not only for the manager they think he is, but hugely for the manager they think he can become. And we don't know if he can manage at the top level, managing the Champions League. Well, incidentally, his record's been very good so far.
Yes.
For United, until we give him a chance to do so. And so they want a long-term proposition. They want a long-term arrangement, which is probably why they didn't give the job to Mourinho. And they've got what they've got, and they've got to stick with it and hope it comes off. And I think, he's finding it hard to adjust to being under the public eye and under scrutiny every second of every day, which is what happens at a big club. And we've seen that happen before with managers and players who've stepped up from average to good teams to really big teams. and it takes them a while to find their feet. Unfortunately, in the sort of current environment of instant gratification and instant results, he's finding himself under huge pressure.
Yeah.
And it's just how he deals with that.
Yeah, that's why Mourinho never made sense to me as a candidate at United, because, as you said, they wanted something long term, and that's obviously a function of having Ferguson in the job for so long. You want to go from strength to strength, stability to stability. You don't want to upset a club that has been built on the idea that the man in charge is going to be the man in charge from year to year. So we'll see what happens with David Moyes. You mentioned we were talking about this before we came on the air, because I have some weather coming, and right now in England, it's raining all the time. The rain is record amounts, and I have to wonder. And I said that every time I turn on the television, it's pouring. How do you think that's affecting the play? I mean, look, it's a level playing field; everybody's playing in it. But how do you think it's sort of impacting how these teams approach this? Not that they wouldn't be used to playing in rain, but every time out.
Yeah, to your listeners in the US who haven't really been to Britain, I imagine they think of it as somewhere that rains all the time anyway. It sort of does, but it's just got a lot worse. And so I don't know if it will necessarily affect players at the top level. I mean, we've seen it sort of wreak havoc around the lower leagues. The team I support, Portsmouth, has been in League Two, has been sort of okay. But the stadium they play in is very exposed to the south coast and to the elements, and so it can affect it. But at the top level, the facilities are so good that really it's not going to make too much of a difference, I don't think. And in actual fact, it's not just in the UK, it's been in Europe in general, I think, which is seen. I mean, we've seen games in Italy called off as well and things like that. Yes, so it's certainly been an interesting one. I've heard that Stoke play Swansea tonight. Swansea travel to Stoke, which is well known as being the sort of archetypal difficult place to go in terms of weather. It's almost a cliche now. And I've heard the weather there is absolutely horrific. So I don't know if that game will go ahead, but they do certainly make them tough up there, so maybe it will. Yeah,
I certainly think we're thankful for modern drainage technology, which most of the top teams will have in place and will help the conditions. Because you mentioned Italy. Yeah, that Roma Parma game was had to be called off because the ball wouldn't move. And we have yet to we haven't yet to see that in England, and that's a credit to sort of being prepared for that type of thing. But you have to imagine that at some point it sort of wears on you. I mean, we've all played in the rain, Luke. And in fact, some of my best memories are playing in the rain. But I just wonder from a psychological standpoint if that's an issue for them. I mean, not that we can really tell.
I think I've read today that David Moyes was in a particularly bad mood in his press conference earlier. So maybe that's got something to do with the weather. But I mean, he's a Scotsman, so he's probably used to bad weather.
I imagine. Is there any situation that's more indicative of how tight and how crazy this particular season is than West Ham, who has strung together 3 wins in a row, I think, and has now climbed from the relegation zone to 10th overall, and they're still only 4 points off the drop zone. So it just indicates how crazy this season has been.
If they carry on like this, they'll be topping, mate.
Yes.
I think it does, yeah. I mean, we talked a bit at the top of the call about the top of the Premier League, but yeah, the bottom shift is interesting. 2-3 wins on the spin can transform your season. It's really that close at the moment. And West Ham sort of flirted with the idea of embarrassing themselves over that Andy Carroll ban, but that seems to have all been forgotten about now. And it's very, very interesting how quickly a piece of bad news can be completely forgotten about when you get a couple of wins under your belt. And West Ham have actually done really well in terms of conceding goals this season. They've tended to concede them in patches in certain games in quite a big way. But in actual fact, I think they've got the most clean sheets in the Premier League this season, in the entire league. And that's what this last 2 or 3 games have been built on. I don't think they've conceded a goal. They've worked really hard, and it's also coincided with the return of form of Kevin Nolan, who's been really important for them. And really, what they've shown is that there are a lot of beatable teams in that league. There's not really an awful lot to choose between the bottom half of the table on any given day. And Big Sam Allardyce, for all his faults, and he's a slightly unpopular character for his arrogance and stuff like that around the country, but he's a seasoned operator at the Premier League level, and he can certainly do it, and he's shown that. And credit to him, because they've almost transformed the season in the space of about 2 weeks.
Allardyce, and that's an interesting kind of skill set to have, to be that guy that knows how to work things so that you can avoid relegation, essentially. I mean, saving teams from going down. If that's your skill set, you're not going to climb above a certain level. But he's also got, the reputation of managing teams that don't play the best football. Are you?
I think Hernandez has been lucky. I think over the last few weeks, I think he's been pretty lucky. And they were very lucky against Chelsea. They could have conceded a whole bunch of goals, man. And he was pretty lucky last night. I mean, the keeper made some really good saves. And if you, on another day, that's completely different results. So of course there's an element of luck involved. Mm-hmm. And when your teams don't play great football, as Tony Pulis has seen in his time at Stoke, you do tend to get a lot more pressure on you when the results aren't going well, because fans don't like it as much. The press get on your back and try and sort of mock you and sneer at you almost for playing this sort of agricultural brand of football. So when you elect to play that type of game, and you have to get results, and if you don't, the pressure will come on you a lot harder than it would do otherwise.
It just seems like that's a no-win scenario for someone like Pulis, or, well, less so Allardyce because of his reputation, but certainly like Pulis, because you don't have the resources to play the kind of football that's going to entertain on a week-to-week basis. So you play what is a practical style in order to keep yourself from going down, and then things don't go well, and you're done, and you're kicked out the door.
Yeah, I think what Tony Pulis showed at Stoke is that it only gets you so far.
Right.
I mean, Pulis deserves credit for getting Stoke to where they are. I mean, arguably overachieved. But the counter arguments to that are, well, we didn't really kick on after that, and we spent an awful lot of money doing it. So at some point, you've got to change things up. Now, do I think that Mark Hughes as a replacement was a forward step? Probably not. But they need to freshen it up. And we've seen with what Tony Pulis is doing at Palace, that at medium-sized clubs, people like Sam Allardyce, people like Tony Pulis can really achieve. It's no coincidence. And while there are other factors involved in this, it's no coincidence that big Sam Allardyce went to Newcastle and didn't really do an awful lot. It didn't work for him because Newcastle was a genuinely big club. And I think he found the scrutiny and the situation and all this other stuff quite hard.
Luke Moore from the World Famous Football Ramble giving us his insight into the Premier League. Stay dry, Luke. I appreciate your time.
I'll try to. Thanks. Speak to you again soon. Cheers.
Let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to grab Kyle McCarthy from Fox Soccer. We'll talk to him about the notion of MLS in the Copa Libertadores. Maybe a little bit of preview on the season. Don't go anywhere. Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV.
Welcome back to Soccer Morning on NASN with Jason Davis.
Jason Davis back on Soccer Morning, joined now by Fox Soccer's Kyle McCarthy, who has a new space over at Fox Soccer, Inside MLS. Hi, Kyle. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks. How are you doing?
Congratulations on Inside MLS, by the way. I forgot to do that, to congratulate you.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm really excited about how everything's going, and I hope everybody gets a chance to check out the site because we're doing a lot of different things with it, and we're hoping to cover the league in a really comprehensive fashion this season.
I can think of no one better to do so than Kyle McCarthy. Let's start with something you've got posted to Inside MLS. It's this idea that's been bouncing around American soccer circles for a while. I have no idea how seriously it's taken in South America, but the notion of MLS in the Copa Libertadores, I think it appeals to MLS fans because it's a chance for MLS teams to be competing in what is the most prestigious club competition in this part of the world. But it doesn't seem likely, and there are several reasons it probably isn't the best idea for MLS, Kyle.
There are a lot of concerns behind any potential transition into the Copa Libertadores. The first one, from an MLS perspective, is the allegiance to the CONCACAF Champions League.
Sure.
MLS plays in CONCACAF. They have to send their best teams to the CONCACAF Champions League.
Right. Which is what just to put this out there, that's what Liga MX does. The teams that go into they have obviously a much more convoluted setup with the two seasons, but they send their best teams or they send their top teams to the CONCACAF Champions League, and then there's another set of qualifications for Copa Lib, correct?
Yeah, so the top two teams from the Apertura and the Clausura in a given calendar year are in the CONCACAF Champions League, and then they take the top three eligible teams from the Apertura, and it's a situation where Mexico has to rely on its depth to provide good teams into the Libertadores.
And we've seen them be relatively successful. They have Morelia did not get through the preliminary round, but they do have two teams in the group stage. We'll see how they do. I think they've already started. I'm not up to date on my Liga MX teams and the Copa Lib, but I believe those games have already started. But let's get back to MLS for a second. Even if we kind of put out there, okay, the MLS is always going to have to defer to the Champions League first because it's within their confederation. There's also the issue of MLS never having won that Champions League and that being sort of cart before the horse if you want to go into Copa Lib.
MLS needs to take care of business in its own confederation before it can even think about going elsewhere. And right now, MLS has not won the CONCACAF Champions League in the modern era. They've only advanced the final once when Salt Lake made that run. And they've struggled to compete against Mexican teams. Mm-hmm. I think before MLS can really look further afield, they have to start taking care of business at home.
Again, the idea is appealing on many levels. Let's imagine a future where MLS teams are they're already competitive in the Champions League, but let's imagine a future where they're beating Mexican teams fairly regularly and they're winning that competition. Is there any other potential problems if they can go from that to putting their next 3 or 4 teams or 2 or 3 teams, however many invites they could get, into Copa Lib?
Well, the major problem from MLS's perspective would involve the amount of money that it would require to make that happen. When you look at the disparity between MLS and Liga MX in terms of salaries, and I'm talking average salary across the board, that would require a significant investment. And then if you pile on the fact that you're going to throw extra fixtures into an already crowded schedule, you're going to have to spend a lot of money, not only to raise the quality within the squad, but increase its depth. And that's a significant investment. And I'm not sure at the moment that the return is there for the MLS Board of Governors to sign off on such a move. I think at this stage, it just doesn't really make sense.
One of the problems that has always confronted MLS when it goes into the Champions League knockout stages is that it just doesn't match up very well with the MLS schedule. These teams are just getting started. They're not particularly in form. They haven't gotten all of their legs underneath them, and then they're supposed to go into knockout rounds and beat Mexican teams. Is it possible that MLS would be much more competitive if it matched their schedule, and can that ever be rectified? I know we've moved CONCACAF has moved things a little bit to help MLS teams, but it will never be in the right spot.
It's never going to be perfect for MLS, and it just adds to the level of difficulty. I don't know if the schedule shift would cure all of the ills. It might give MLS teams a better chance, but I think there are more pervasive problems than just the schedule at this point when you're talking about MLS teams trying to compete with Liga MX teams, or at some point in the future trying to compete with Brazilian and Argentine teams. I think there are larger concerns at play there.
You know, it's again, it's a kind of a cart before the horse thing because MLS has yet to win its own Confederation championship. But is there something, and this is just a glass ceiling that MLS is going to bump its head up against eventually, but is there something to be said for the lack of Major League Soccer's ability to prove themselves outside of this little bubble? When we talk about players coming from Europe or the league being more attractive, or if Julio Cesar is ruining his chances at a World Cup by coming here, part of that issue is that MLS doesn't have very many avenues to prove it can be competitive on a quality level with other leagues around the world. Would this potentially solve some of that if it ever came to pass?
It might appeal to the MLS segment that wants to prove itself at all points. I'm not necessarily of the belief that MLS needs to go out and prove itself day after day.
Okay.
I think the league's been successful. I think that there's a good standard of play, and I think the inferiority complex sometimes masks the fact that the league's doing just fine. But if people think that they need to go out and prove themselves, the Copa Libertadores is a good way to do that.
Mm-hmm. You know, we've obviously seen MLS put more and more emphasis on the Champions League over the last couple of years. Obviously RSL got very, very close, and it seems to become it's Major League Soccer's windmill, for lack of a better analogy. Is that distracting from your perspective? Is that distracting from some other concerns, or is it okay for MLS to say, look, this is the one avenue we have to prove ourselves against the best league in our region, which is Mexico? Let's go ahead and give some more resources to those teams to be competitive.
MLS needs to emphasize the CONCACAF Champions League, and it's not from a wider perspective. It's not a marketing thing. It's a way of proving to those diehard fans and proving to the league itself that it's capable of competing with the best league in the Confederation. Mm-hmm. And to make those small steps, and the allocation money provided is not a massive amount. I think it's something that MLS has tried to prioritize, and I think they should, because it's important to be competitive against the top teams in this confederation. MLS wants to be there, so you have to provide some resources to go and achieve that goal.
Do any of these teams in this next Champions League have a realistic shot at it, Kyle, in your estimation?
If there's one MLS team you would think that could do it, it would probably be Sporting Kansas City, if only because the way that team plays is so different than what a lot of Mexican teams see on a regular basis. Mm-hmm. That it might provide a little bit of a unique look. It's tough for an MLS team just coming out of preseason to compete with a Mexican team in the middle of the Clausura. Mm. But if you're going to do it, you don't want to try and beat a Liga MX team at its own game. Mm. You have to provide something different, and I think Sporting Kansas City, with the way it likes to press high and unsettle the opposition and really impose itself physically, could be the sort of side that would have a little bit of success. But do I think this is the year an MLS team wins the CONCACAF Champions League? No, okay. I don't.
Well, I mean, Sporting's got Cruz Azul, and we know how well they're playing right now in the Clausura. San Jose, Toluca, LA, and Tijuana, and I'm talking about the knockout stages coming up in March. Those games are March 11 and 12, the opening legs of those series, and then we can move on to the next Champions League, with group play later in the summer. And I'm going to say this very bluntly, because I think this was a concern of a lot of MLS fans coming out of 2013, is Is DC United going to embarrass itself in this competition?
I don't think so. I think the experience that United has cobbled together during the close season will help when you're looking at what they're trying to do in the Champions League later this year. Is it ideal to have a team like DC United with 3 wins out of 34 last season in the next edition of the CONCACAF Champions League? No, it's not. But I think United is the sort of club that will rise to the occasion and at least acquit itself mildly well moving into that tournament later this year.
Look, I mean, obviously this is a subjective thing. It's difficult to put your finger on exactly how much better the league is getting from year to year. But this has been an incredibly interesting offseason. We've seen some very big money spent on some very big names, Kyle. In just sort of, if you could give a blanket assessment, is the league going to be better in 2014 than it was in 2013? Or is there any sense that kind of improvement can happen year to year rather than over a longer time span?
It's tough to gauge the improvement from year to year, but when you look at the outlays at the top end of the league, especially with Toronto FC signing Michael Bradley and Jermaine Defoe, it's hard not to look at it and think, well, MLS is taking a significant step forward. And the question for this league this year and heading into the next couple of years is how far the clubs in this league really want to push it. Toronto FC has set a standard now. The question is, how far will the Board of Governors and will the other clubs go toward that new standard? Because there are a lot of questions about how the economics will work in the wake of what we've seen so far this offseason.
There are so many talking points ahead of this season, not just because of the new talent coming in, but obviously we're steaming towards a new TV deal for MLS that'll take effect next season. We've got a CBA negotiation coming up after the season. Expansion is on the top of everybody's mind, which seems to be distracting a little bit from the preparations for the actual games, Kyle. And look, I mean, it's preseason. You don't take a lot out of it. Results don't really mean a thing. If you see your team draw with a local college side, do not fret. It doesn't necessarily mean your team's in trouble. But do you have a sense of any of this right now? If you had to make picks right now, would you feel comfortable at all?
No. I want more information. I always want more information. And it's tough to gather what you want from preseason because teams have different priorities. They have different levels of emphasis on different areas of the field. Right now, everybody's just trying to figure out what they've got and how they want to use it. And it's particularly in this year, there's going to be a lot of upheaval because you'll have players coming and going ahead of the World Cup. Mm-hmm. You'll have other priorities taking precedence. You have teams in the CONCACAF Champions League early in the year and toward the end of the summer. There are a lot of different things going on. So it's going to take a little bit of time for this league and the clubs to figure out how this season's going to unfold because it's a little bit more peculiar than usual.
If you had to pick out one name from the incoming players so far that is not Michael Bradley, Jermaine Defoe, not any of those top headline guys to watch for, do you have any idea? Do you have any grasp on that yet? Is Samuel in LA going to make some noise? Who's the guy?
I'll stay in LA, and I'm not sure he's going to be the best player, but I think he could be one of the most important. And it's Galaxy winger Stefan Ishizaki.
Okay.
Bruce, I know. Okay, right? But the reason why I think he's important is that the Galaxy has looked for wingers over the past couple of years, and they haven't quite found a solution. So they've ended up playing kind of narrowly and relying on Landon Donovan to drop off and run at people from different angles. If Ishizaki can come into the team and provide a little bit of width, that's going to create an awful lot more space for the likes of Robbie Keane and Landon Donovan and everybody else in that group to really get after teams. And I'm not sure he's going to be the guy, but the fact that the Galaxy has gone out and obtained him at least gives them another option as they try and get a little bit of width. And that's the sort of principle that they're going to need if they want to advance deep into the Champions League to see Club Tijuana and move on from there and continue their pursuit of MLS Cup.
Kyle McCarthy from FoxSoccer.com. Check out Inside MLS, his new area space blog. I mean, what are we calling these things these days, Kyle? Is it a blog? Do you call it a blog?
You can call it a blog. You can call it a section. I mean, we have a Twitter feed at Inside MLS, so we've got that. I mean, you can call it whatever you want.
Call it whatever you want. It's another place for MLS fans to go get news and analysis from Kyle McCarthy and company over at Fox Soccer. Thank you for your time, Kyle. I appreciate it, man.
Thanks for having me.
Right.
Have a good one.
Talk to you soon. All right, let's power through. We've got Ewan Marshall coming up at 11 o'clock from Sao Paulo. I want to ask him about Julio Cesar moving to TFC and how that's being viewed in Brazil. I mentioned yesterday Phil Scolari sort of saying, hey, look, we want him to play. MLS may not be the best league in the world, but there are worse things than Julio Cesar going to MLS. And my other question, I mean, look, Brazil's goalkeeper situation, if Julio Cesar is the guy, who else does Brazil have right now? I need to know their depth. I need to go check out their depth chart. I'm just off the top of my head, I'm not pulling another Brazilian goalkeeper. All right. But before then, in the meantime, open up the phone lines, 347-756-6276. Give me a call, talk MLS, talk Copa Lib, MLS and Copa Lib. If you want to give me your reasons why that is or is not a good idea. But I want to move to an interview from Jurgen Klinsmann with FIFA.com that dropped yesterday. And the only reason look, none of this stuff is particularly controversial or overly interesting for that matter. The headline says, Klinsmann, winning is all that matters. The takeout lines, the lines that you kind of walk away from remembering a little bit, are the ones that where he says the team is going to give 100% no matter what. And winning is all that matters. The United States has a winning mentality. And again, the reason I bring this up is not because this particular interview is all that interesting, but I find it interesting as juxtaposed against his comments made last week when he said American players don't have the belief to be among the best in the world. And I'm not sure that these things are easily reconciled. If Jurgen Klinsmann says players go to Europe and don't have the belief that they can be the best in the world, but when they pull on the USA jersey, the team is going to give 100% and always believes it can win, the mentality is they want to be the best. So they lack belief individually, but something magical happens with the U.S. men's national team that gives them that belief to win. Is individual motivation so much different than that collective motivation that happens in that team dynamic? Maybe it is. I mean, look, the psychology of the human being, if you are in a new situation in a foreign country where you may or may not speak the language, where you are an outsider from the moment that you step into that situation, then I suppose you may suffer from a lack of confidence. And I suppose that if you go back and you join your national team and there's a history there built upon this mental strength, Americans run hard and always believe. That's what Americans do. If all of that comes together and there's the history of overachieving on some level in some situations, not always, certainly the belief has always been that the USA is greater than the sum of its parts. Is that true? If Jurgen Klinsmann is saying that American players have the talent to be among the best in the world, but not the belief, then is it really true that the national team is greater than the sum of its parts? Or is that a matter of playing down a little bit? Is that lack of confidence in those club situations actually affecting the national team? And yes, I've fallen into Jurgen Klinsmann's trap. I am sitting here trying to analyze Jurgen Klinsmann's words, and there are a lot of them. The man never passes up the opportunity to talk. Never. If you put a camera in front of him or a microphone in front of him, he's going to talk, and he's going to talk to you about these nebulous ideas. about American mentality and about the American spirit, believing and playing like an American team, playing a playing style that matches the American whatever. It doesn't mean anything. I mean, it's high-minded nonsense. I mean, I'm intrigued by it because that's the way my brain works. I would love to see that pattern. I would love to see those connections. America, the country, United States, and the national team playing with American panache. Is there such a thing as what identifies the American spirit? How do we pin that down? Does anybody have a list of attributes? This is America boiled down to 10 points. Here's how you can translate that into soccer. I don't think that exists. I'm sure somebody's tried. I'm sure there's a blog post out there somewhere. Let's type that in. Hold on. Wait a second. No. So here's Jurgen Klinsmann doing his dance again, where he says things without actually saying things. Last week it was, our players don't believe that they can knock out another player, take another player's spot in places like Italy and England. Oh, I wonder who he's talking about. I wonder. Could he be talking about Clint Dempsey and Michael Bradley? No, come on. Of course he is, but he does this thing, this dance, this circling around the issue, where it's sort of plausible deniability. Oh, I'm not really criticizing them. I'm not really saying that Michael Bradley and Clint Dempsey, shouldn't be in MLS. He's talking about the belief. And again, I have this thought that Klinsmann's talking about the future. He wants Americans to believe, and that's fine. In this situation, the American mentality. What's the American mentality? It's all about it's all about motivation, right? It's all about motivation. All right, we'll move on from that. There's only so much you can squeeze out of the Klinsmann thing. The Klinsmann. There's only so much you can squeeze out of Klinsmann. Football movie, American football. These guys putting together a World Cup movie. They agree that that MLS and Copa Lib would propel us into upper echelon of soccer on this continent. Conquer CONCACAF first. Okay, so MLS fans, I suppose that's the question. You could both argue that MLS and Copa Lib improves the profile of the league, whether they succeed, whether they win a lot of games or not. Participating, and I don't think it would be a disaster. It might not be good. It would probably be bad, but it might not be a disaster. MLS teams in Copa Lib raises the league's profile, makes the league more attractive to players from South America or potentially players from Europe who are intrigued by Copa Lib. Therefore, pushing the league forward, helping the league have more money to spend on more players or attract better players so that they can go win the CONCACAF Champions League. Is my logic flawed? I don't think MLS is ready for Copa Lib. Let me say that. That's my position. But just to play devil's advocate here, the travel is insane. You think LA having to go to Montreal is bad? Imagine throwing a Copa Lib game into the middle of that. Here you go. Go down to Sao Paulo. Go down to, seriously, go down to Buenos Aires in the middle of your season and then fly back and play a game on the weekend against someone else in the league. I think the problem here that MLS has, and again, this is partly a function of the schedule, which I'm with. I don't think that playing right now would be a good idea. I know it's only a month away, but you hope the weather improves a little bit. I don't think playing in the winter is a good idea. So MLS is always going to have a problem with its schedule. But you can imagine a situation where MLS is sort of, again, bumping their head up against a ceiling. The ceiling is we can't prove ourselves outside of this little bubble. Now, this bubble includes Liga MX, and you need to go beat them, and you need to go beat them on a regular basis. You need to make it clear that MLS is on the same playing field as the Mexican side. Now, money-wise, not caught up yet. Money-wise, still a problem. Money-wise, may not for a very long time catch up. We'll see what the TV deal means for the salary cap. We'll see how willing MLS owners are to open up their pocketbooks outside of a couple of DPs. Because the one thing, while I'm excited for Jermaine Defoe and Michael Bradley to be joining TFC, I imagine that TFC would be a better club, better team. They would put out a better side if they were able to take that money, which they're not. They were able to take the money they spent on Jermaine Defoe and Michael Bradley and spread it out across 25 roster spots. Part of MLS's issue has always been depth. And when you go into international competition, you have to play a midweek game and then have to come back and play in the league. Depth is always a problem. And then you have an Open Cup game or a Canadian Championship game. And I think that this is all connected to being able to attract better players. You can't necessarily assume that MLS is going to massively improve its depth with money. Money talks. But it might be a little bit of a stop-start situation. But if they could imagine, if Toronto FC could take $6 million and spend that on 12 players or 10 players or 8 players for that matter, they'd be a better team than just adding Jermaine Defoe and Michael Bradley. They made moves within the league, but those are still within the MLS constraints. So you're still drawing from an MLS talent pool. There's no easy answers here. So when we watch Phil Scolari, we hear that Phil Scolari is commenting on MLS. When we hear that the Brazilians are attempting to put MLS in its proper context because Julio Cesar is going to come here to get games. All of that is tied back to the notion that MLS, if it's going to improve its reputation, it's going to have to do it within this North American sphere. And not be able to go outside of the region to look, the Club World Cup's a thing. I guess that again, if you go to the Club World Cup and you beat Barcelona, that means something. Doesn't mean that much. This isn't consistently going to happen. 718, you're on the air for 1 minute. What's up?
All right, man. My name is Caesar from New York.
What's up, Caesar?
I hear that you're talking about the players, attracting more players by being in Copa Lib, but what about coaches? Coming in
that too. That's part of it. I mean, I want American coaches to get better. So I want American coaches to get, a bulk of MLS jobs. I have no problem with foreign managers coming in. But the problem with that, Cesar, is you know that the rules make it difficult.
But what about like a Jason Christ situation where he's at City learning from the European clubs?
Okay. Yes, I could say I could
see that happening.
Any cross-pollination, any more significant cross-pollination outside of just bringing some Argentines in, bringing some Brazilians in, any of that between MLS and South American football culture would be a benefit to MLS. No doubt about that, right?
Yeah. No problem.
All right, man. Thanks for the call. Appreciate it. All right, let's take a break. Speaking of South America, look at this segue. This is money. We're going to talk Brazil. Ewan Marshall, based in Sao Paulo, writer down there. He'll talk to us about Julio Cesar's move. We'll ask him about Bomcenso FC. That's still a thing. Don't go anywhere. Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV.
Welcome back to Soccer Morning on NASN with Jason Davis.
Back on Soccer Morning, we turn now. We're talking about South America a little bit. Let's go to Brazil. We'll talk to Ewan Marshall. You can find him on Twitter, Ewan Marshall. Go do that. He is a writer living down in Sao Paulo, covering Brazilian football, and that's why he's here. Ewan, how are you?
Yeah, not bad. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us this morning. It's afternoon where you are, but this morning for me. Ewan, let me start with Julio Cesar. This kind of came out of nowhere in MLS circles. Even the initial notion that Julio Cesar would be moving to MLS, would join Toronto FC on loan, seemed incredible, and now it very much seems like it's going to happen. What has the response been to the notion of him playing in MLS?
Well, it's interesting because the idea of the number one Brazilian goalkeeper, well, as in the first choice number one goalkeeper, playing in the MLS it's a bit strange for the Brazilian public. But the big thing with Julio Cesar is that he just needs first team football.
Right.
That is really the only question as far as he's concerned, because he came back into the Brazil squad just before the Confederations Cup, and he had a great tournament, and it was he was very secure in goal. But since then, I mean, the lack of playing time has just meant that first choice goalkeeping spot in the national team, it used to be a certainty, and now it's a bit of a headache. So he just needed the playing time.
I think that's one of the questions that kind of comes out of this situation. What is the issue with Brazilian goalkeepers right now?
Well, the thing is, if you asked Luis Felipe Scolari, the national team coach, he would probably tell you that there isn't really much of an issue with the goalkeepers, because he has complete faith in Julio Cesar and his ability. And I mean, at the end of last year, he was quoted saying that Julio Cesar is the first confirmed member of the 23-man World Cup squad, even if he is on the bench at QPR. But there is some decent backup goalkeepers in the Brazilian league just now. Probably the second in line will be Jefferson of Botafogo. He's an interesting goalkeeper. He's a bit erratic at times. Doesn't come off his line very well. There's Victor at Atlético Mineiro, he's quite an interesting goalkeeper. So there are goalkeepers around. There's not a lot of them in Europe, but as I say, Scolari has complete faith in Julio Cesar.
And that's, I mean, I guess part of that question then is, how important is the quality of the competition you're in as a goalkeeper, as long as you are active and forced to make decisions and can stay in form and make saves? That's really the issue for Julio Cesar.
Yeah, that's it. Because, I mean, to play at the top level in goal, what you need is, you need confidence, you need that sharpness, to make those decisions, to make them correctly. And that sharpness only really comes from playing first team football. And because, Julio Cesar doesn't really have anything to prove in terms of his own ability. I mean, people know how accomplished a goalkeeper he is. So it seems to be a case of just getting that sharpness back, get that decision-making on point so he's ready for the World Cup.
What were the other sort of assessments? I mean, look, just a full disclosure, Ewan, American football soccer fans have an incredible inferiority complex when it comes to what we do here in terms of the game. And look, MLS is a growing league. It's an improving league. We know where it stands. No one is deluding themselves over the quality of the league. But we are interested when Scolari and types like him make a comment about it. What did he say? If you're aware, what did he say specifically about MLS? And, is there a greater sense? MLS has been bringing in Brazilians like every other league in the world for some time now, but is there a sense that MLS is growing in inside Brazil, I suppose?
Well, definitely the notion of MLS has been growing for quite a while, the idea that it is improving. But the thing is, like Scolari himself talking about Toronto FC and Major League Soccer, so he's mainly playing on the point that I mentioned, as in that Julio Cesar just needs first team football.
Right.
And because of his high salary, there are very few clubs who'd be able to take him on. So the fact that he got that opportunity or he is getting that opportunity at Toronto FC, I mean, that's ideal no matter where the league is. But in terms of Major League Soccer's reputation in Brazil, definitely it is seen with, it's not held in the highest regard over here.
Sure.
But there are people coming around to it. I mean, obviously there's a lot more Brazilians going up there. You have, for example, the young Fluminense forward Samuel, I believe it is. So yes. he moved up to Major League Soccer this year. And so he was quite popular with Fluminense, and they were confused as to why he went to Major League Soccer. But yeah, it's definitely growing.
There's some notion that those individual players can somehow be a bit of a litmus test. And you have Juninho, the defensive midfielder, at the same club at LA Galaxy where Samuel is going to be playing. And, eventually the Galaxy, because he played so well for them and he was so crucial to their efforts, completed a purchase. But there was this, for a little while, a question whether or not he would go back. I can't remember what club he was with. I apologize. He would go back to Brazil, and would there be a place for him in that club? And I think that while Galaxy fans would be crushed to lose him, I wonder if some MLS fans would have been okay with him going back if he was going to play, because then it would be, well, look, he developed himself here in MLS, and now he's playing in Brazil. That's a good sign for MLS.
Yeah, definitely. The only problem with Juninho in that particular example is that he doesn't really have much of a name in Brazil.
Right.
He doesn't have a big stock,
right.
Unfortunately. So maybe with Samuel, as I say, because he got quite a few admirers when he was playing at Fluminense last season. He did okay. He's a fairly handy forward. Perhaps if he does a good job, I mean, if he was to come back, people would remember him definitely. There was another Juninho, Juninho Pernambucano was obviously he was at New York, if I remember rightly.
Yes, he was briefly and not spectacularly. No.
Yeah. So that was quite interesting when he went over there. That actually did quite a good job of getting the name of Major League Soccer out there. What is quite interesting actually is when talking to Brazilians about Major League Soccer, in terms of the attendances and the interest in the league, which is actually, it's comparable in terms of the attendances. It's comparable to the Brazilian league,
right?
Because Brazilian attendances are suffering so much, and so that really kind of puts some Brazilian football fans in check a little bit. But
yeah, that has been sort of disseminated in these parts a little bit. MLS average attendance higher than Brazilian attendance. And look, I think that what people miss is what you just said, that attendance is suffering in Brazil, but that's not necessarily because the people don't love their football. There are a lot of other factors involved.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah, definitely.
And in that same vein, I have to ask you about the player movement, Bom Senso FC. We've seen some sit-down protests. I think these things are building. I saw this morning, and this is apologize, this is brand new to me, that the leader of this group, one of the leaders of this group, has moved to China now. How does that affect things?
Yeah, well, Bom Senso, I don't know how in-depth you've covered it on this program before, but just as a quick recap, so basically this is just a players' union, which has been put together by a couple of important key players in some of the top division sides. And so that's out with like the official players' trade union, and the fact that the official players' trade union in Brazil have actually been quite inactive and actually quite ineffective for quite a while now. And so the players kind of took it on themselves to create their own little union. But anyway, so they've been staging these protests at the end of last season's national championship. And so their aim obviously is just to improve working conditions for footballers in Brazil. So that goes from the hugely overcrowded calendar for the big clubs and the practically deserted calendar for the smaller clubs. And obviously things like the recent story at Corinthians as well, where about 100 members of an organised supporters group broke into their training ground and threatened their players. Things like that, the security of the players. is what Bom Senso are trying to go for. And yeah, you're right. So Paulo André, he is a centre-back who formerly for Corinthians, and he is one of the key members of the group, one of the leaders, you could say. And so it has come out this morning that he is signed for a club in China. So hopefully that doesn't derail the whole thing. I don't think it will, although Paulo André is he's quite a respected voice, especially amongst the fellow professionals. And yeah, hopefully it'll still go. I mean, we've still got players like Rogério Ceni and, for example, like a lot of big characters still in the Brazilian league who are still going to be involved in this.
Yeah, I
don't think it's going down on his feet.
I imagine there are several players who have the respect of other players throughout Brazil who can lead by example. I mean, imagine this is a collective effort. Clearly, you mentioned the crowded calendar. I think that unless you are really paying attention and know your Brazilian football, you may not be aware of how that calendar works. It's insane to people outside of Brazil. At least it's insane to me, and I don't know how Europeans feel about this with the state tournaments and the league and everything else. And then I imagine financial concerns. I mean, how big is the gap? Because we talk about the financial gap between the two big clubs in Spain and the rest of La Liga, and then obviously down the ladder there, and certainly things like that are evident in England and Germany and in many leagues around the world. How big is the gap between the biggest clubs in Brazil and those farther down the table and those local clubs, and how are the players suffering from those conditions?
Well, I mean, on the most part, the gap is pretty huge. But the thing is that the Brazilian league, it doesn't have your two big teams like Spain does. It has, because of the size of the country, it has many, many big teams. I mean, so there's four giant teams in Rio de Janeiro. There's four giant teams in São Paulo. There's two really big teams in Belo Horizonte and Porto Alegre. There's a lot of really, really big institutions. But definitely, it is them who are quite a step above the rest of the pack in terms of finances. But I mean, even the big clubs are suffering financially. You had Vasco da Gama, for example, a massive club in Rio de Janeiro. They were relegated last year, and they went several months without paying their players as well. So even the big clubs aren't. They can't escape from these financial problems, which is actually one of the, linking back to Julio Cesar as well. There was a few Brazilian clubs who were really interested in signing Julio Cesar, which would have been the real ideal move for Julio. But it was Santos and Grêmio, actually. They were really quite advanced in their talks, but it was his salary. They just couldn't pay it, even though the Brazilian economy took a real boom in the past decade, and the Brazilian clubs had a lot more spending power. They're now kind of realizing that perhaps they really need to start saving up a little bit. I've heard sort of indirectly and read some things that when players are on large salaries, particularly Brazilian players who come back, and Ronaldinho is one of them, that there are other agreements made, there are other arrangements made. Is that something that's kind of fading in its relevance? I'm talking about subsidizing player salaries through third parties. Right. Yeah, it still happens. You have a lot of, especially young players. Actually, most of the news items that come out about these young talents is about how X investment group has just bought 15% of this player. That sort of thing. And in terms of subsidizing wages for first team players, I mean, that certainly happens still all over Brazil. But one of the big things that happened actually with Ronaldinho when he was at Flamengo was that the team was struggling a bit, and they were actually struggling to find the sponsors who would actually pay Ronaldinho's wage, which is still a big problem. So there is a lot of interest from third parties to pay these subsidized wages, but they need to kind of prove it on the field to earn these sponsorships, The backdrop to the financial issues that are affecting Brazilian football, which are not unique to Brazilian football, but are certainly of a concern, and Bom Senso and all of this is the preparations for the World Cup, and we are very, very close. I can almost feel it here.
We've had several guests on this show over the past year or so to talk through the issues that Brazil is facing with this World Cup. We've talked to Tim Vickery, talked to a professor who is particularly in tune with the protest movement. From where you sit and your perspective, are we headed for anything particularly interesting, or is this going to come off well enough that all parties involved can kind of say, we got through that?
I think that situation that you've just described, that's exactly what we're going to be getting at the end of the tournament. A case of, we've avoided a bit of a disaster. We've got it done though. Like stadiums are almost all going to be ready. There looks like there might be a little problem in Curitiba, but in the stadium there in the south. But I mean, who knows? That could get fixed in time. I think they have, by the end of next week, I think they need to have a final decision on whether that stadium is going to be ready. Mm-hmm. And it's just going to be the little things like infrastructure, the problems waiting in airports. I think the journalists are actually going to have quite a tough time of it in terms of the logistics on the ground, that sort of thing. But they're going to get through it. Very interested to see what happens with the kind of protest movements come the World Cup. Mm-hmm. I'm sure there will be a lot of incidents, things going on, but I think it's quite a positive change in Brazilian society. And I think it is going to be a case of, thank God we've managed to pull off the tournament. But I think for the fans in particular, it's going to be a great. They're going to have a great time. There's going to be all the best players in the world playing. As I said, the journalists might have a bit of a tough time though.
It's interesting. I imagine, obviously up here, ESPN has the coverage, and there's going to be some questions about how they cover both the tournament, which is that's what they're there for, to cover the actual soccer on the field, and then everything else that's kind of going on around it. And you mentioned the way that you said that kind of has me thinking that I suppose all of these both of these things, the tournament and FIFA being there and the fans' experience and all of that can happen in parallel to the protest movement and whatever message is important for the Brazilian people to get out, and them not necessarily conflict. I mean, look, they're going to be in the same spaces, I imagine, in some ways, but they don't necessarily have to conflict and cause problems for one another.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's fair. But in terms of like on match day, I can imagine that the security around these grounds is going to be the highest possible level of security, and I don't think there will be any protesters that will make it anywhere near the grounds, which is perhaps unfortunate in a way. But it's going to be it's certainly going to be very interesting. I think you're right, as in the protests will not necessarily affect the success of the tournament, because FIFA, it's like when FIFA come to town, they have their own kind of sovereignty. They make they make the venues their own. And that's not really going to be. I don't think there's going to be a huge problem in terms of the running of the tournament. But yeah, the international eye on Brazil and on the protest movement is just going to be fascinating and really useful.
Mm-hmm. I'm interested. I'll close with this with you, Ewan. I'm interested, and I don't know how much time we'll even have to cover it in this forum, because we have to be talking about the game as it moves on. But be interested in what happens in the aftermath. And if Brazil does not win, because if they do win, I imagine it's a very bread and circuses type of situation. Not everybody will be appeased, but certainly there'll be a national celebration winning it in their own country. But if they don't win, what happens the day after the World Cup?
What happens the day after the World Cup? Well, I suppose that might depend on the circumstances.
Okay.
In them not winning. Obviously, a final against Argentina or Uruguay would be particularly hard to take. But it's definitely if they don't win it, it's going to be a huge problem.
Okay. But, I just imagine that the scrutiny on everything that happened. And the misappropriation of funds and the lack of accountability on the part of government officials and the people in charge of putting these stadiums together, that is of much more concern if Brazil does not win. It becomes a much bigger issue.
Well, yeah, like you saw after the '98 World Cup, actually, when Brazil lost in the final in France, there was a kind of an official inquiry put into that, and you had players like Ronaldo and Roberto Carlos up on the stand, having to defend themselves. Yeah. Why didn't you mark Zidane? That sort of thing. So it's definitely going to be. I could definitely see that happening. Inquiries are plenty.
Well, we will keep your name in our Rolodex so that down the line, if necessary, we can bring you back on to get your perspective. Ewan Marshall, go follow him on Twitter. Ewan Marshall, EUAN Marshall. Thank you very much for your time, Ewan. I appreciate it.
No problem.
All right, man. Let's move along. Let's talk a little bit. Let's talk what you want to talk about. 347-756-6276 is the phone number. We're here. For the next 10 minutes or so, get your thoughts on all of those Brazilian issues. I mean, I know not everybody is going to be as interested in the backdrop and in what happens around the World Cup as I will be. If you just care about what happens on the field and the football, that's fine. That's your prerogative. You're a football fan. You're a soccer fan. Boom. You're good. That's what the tournament's there for. But I will be curious because all of these things, and we just got done talking to Ewan about the state of the Brazilian league and the financial problems that some of these clubs are having. Even big clubs are having financial issues. There is sort of a domino effect. Doesn't mean that the Brazilian league is going anywhere. Doesn't mean that any particular country or place will benefit in a large way. But I've recently had reason to sort of talk about MLS as it relates to everybody, as it relates to the league being a copycat league. I said it that way. You remember when MLS was in love with Colombian players and it grabbed a bunch of Colombian players? That wasn't just because, hey, Colombian players are good. It was because there was enough instability in the Colombian leagues to make Colombian players attractive to MLS as a value signing in a lot of ways. We've seen some of that in Argentina. Now it's happening where more and more Argentinian players are coming. And while MLS has always grabbed Brazilians in a scattershot sort of way, you could imagine a situation where if Brazil suffers, MLS can benefit from those players. I don't want that to happen. I'm not saying I want the Brazilian league to have so much instability, the Brazilian clubs to have so much instability that somehow Brazilian players are available on the cheap and MLS gets them. I'm not necessarily saying I want that. But if it happens, if this path continues, if these players who are protesting or sitting down on the field after the opening whistle and not moving for a minute and are demanding better working conditions and more consistency in their pay, which MLS can guarantee. MLS may not be able to guarantee the same wages a lot of places can, but these are the things that MLS has going for them. You're going to get paid, and you're going to get paid on time. You're not really going to be beset upon by a group of fans who are angry over something. No, that's not going to happen here for many reasons. One of them being we just don't have those type of fans. The sport isn't that popular. That's never that stuff doesn't happen in other sports that we really, really care about. It's definitely not going to happen in soccer. The facilities, almost across the board, with a few notable exceptions, are very, very good. You're going to be playing in front of solid crowds, not world-class, huge, massive crowds, except for except for in Seattle. But you're going to be playing in front of good crowds. Your quality of life in terms of being a professional player will improve, and that's one of MLS's major selling points. And that's why it's strange to sort of be a fan of the world's game, a fan of the game across the globe, have an eye on Europe and South America, and be paying attention a little bit to all of these things. Liking some of it, not liking some of it, but never wishing ill on any particular league or team. I mean, look, soccer is a vast fabric, for lack of a better analogy. I don't want to see holes in it anywhere. But then again, I want MLS to get better. And I can see how MLS gets better if other leagues suffer. It's a terrible, terrible thought. It probably makes me a terrible person. Right? Thumbs up or thumbs. Am I a terrible person if I have that thought? oh, look, Brazil's having issues. Their players are upset. I wonder if MLS can get some Brazilian players in at a fair wage, not cheap. I don't want anybody to be underpaid, but at a good wage. And they look like, again, going to get paid on time, going to have good facilities, going to be playing in front of good crowds, won't be bothered walking down the street. Maybe some players are fine with being celebrities every time they step out of their house. They have to send somebody to the grocery store because they just can't do it. Maybe some players like that. But there are certainly a number of players who would prefer to be able to go about their lives and be a normal person. One day that's going to change on some level here. I don't know if it'll ever be Brazilian level or Argentina level, probably not. But at some point, at least we hope so, MLS is going to be big enough and the teams will be popular enough that players can't go out and do their normal lives because they'll be recognized and hounded for autographs. Not accosted, but hounded. Yeah. Fantastic show today. Thank you very much to our guests, Luke Moore, Kyle McCarthy, Ewan Marshall. All excellent stuff. Please go to iTunes and leave us a rating and a review. Your review can be great show. 2 words. Take you about 3 seconds to type that. You can find us on Stitcher. You can leave a review on Stitcher too, right? That is a thing, Trevor. Correct? Yes. Stitcher reviews. You can go leave us a Stitcher review. Review the show. Tell people what you think of it, if you like it. If you don't like it, we'd kind of rather you not leave a review. We can just agree not to get along and then move on. And also iHeartRadio, TuneIn, the TuneIn app on your phone can get this show as well. Lots of people sending me a couple of people sending me email about scarf situation. If you want to contribute to the scarf wall, happy to send you an address to send them. Jason@nasn.tv or show@soccermorning.com. That will get there as well. All right. Are we done? And now you and Marshall on Twitter who must be listening in. Hands off our players, he says. I'm not advocating for MLS to raid Brazil. I'm not saying that. I'm saying, well, I am advocating that if it makes sense for MLS, but I'm not saying that I want Brazil to suffer. We can get along. We can always get along. One day Brazil will respect MLS, and then everything will be right with the world. All right. It's going to do it. We will be back tomorrow, provided that snow does not wipe out the entire East Coast. Let's cross our fingers on that. Thanks a lot for listening. Soccer Morning, North American Soccer Network, NASN.TV. Bye, guys.
On the boulevard, I landed. We used to kick routines and the presence was fitting. It was the abstract.